there is a vast difference between what the Bible prescribes and what the Bible describes. The implication that she was making is, hey, some other sweaty bald guy could be arguing the exact opposite point. So how in the world do you know?
We were having a conversation about what is biblical and how does that inform errancy.
Oh, it's not just like grab a Dorito and diet Mountain Dew. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Which church is that?
This is the Tim Stafford Boring Yellow Hair song. Analogy.
Yeah.
Hierarchy. Stratification.
Oh, yeah. Here you go.
Analogy. I know. I was trying to get all the words right that I mispronounced.
Tim Stafford.
Tim Stafford. Hey, everybody.
Hey, buddy, what's up?
What's up?
Voxology podcast here.
Voxology podcast here.
Mike.
Tim Stafford.
5.
It is 2025. And who are you?
It's me.
Me who?
Seth, Prescribes Propaganda, Voxology podcast.
Yes, Seth Erre is our very special tariff correspondent. Seth, are the tariffs on or off today?
It's off.
They're off. Okay. All right. Just checking. What do you think they'll be tomorrow?
Friday?
Yep, Friday. Perfect. I like that answer. Seth Erre, tell us just a little bit about school today. What'd you have today?
Fire drill?
You had a fire drill?
Yep.
Was that scary?
No.
No, dude. We're sorry. We're too brave for that. No. You go outside.
Yes.
And then what did you do?
Play with Fabi.
You played with your floppies. Perfect. Yes. I mean, can't we all spend the fire drill doing that? That is wonderful. All right, Sethi, we've got some folks who are listening with us live tonight. This is our once every couple of months we do a record with us episode where folks from our Patreon community are live in the chat, and we'll get through a little bit of content and then kind of interact in real time with the episode. And so, Seth, anything you want to say to them?
Yes. Hey, Tim. Hey,
What?
music.
There it is. There it is. Let them know there will be music. Timothy Stafford is here with us today. Tim, you have some business to cover.
Some business.
Yes, which is very rare for us. But Tim texted me, said, I've got business tonight. I'm like, okay, let's do this. Do it.
So first and foremost, we are having somebody do a kind of guest edit of this. Ooh. They're going to take a crack at editing the podcast for us and editing the video for us. So they said, hey, maybe let everybody know that this may be a little bit different. So we'll let you know that there will be new hands on the product.
At least for just this episode. Just
at least this episode. We're seeing if we're testing the waters. Because
how many hours does it take you, Timothy, to edit this here high quality podcast?
Last week when it was Gombus, and for some reason my headphones caused like 5 different recording breaks for just my feed.
Oh, wow.
That took me some time.
Was that like 10 hours? I mean, is it like a 10-hour project?
It took probably around that.
Yeah. So we're experimenting.
You and I just kind of sprinting through, then it'll be a couple hours, 3 or 4 to get it all said and done.
Okay. So we're experimenting.
Yeah.
What else we got?
Perhaps. We have some new merch in the merch store. But I wanted to reiterate that while we are selling shirts and hats and sweatshirts and mugs and all that kind of jazz, that you and I, Mike and I, do not get any money from that merch. I don't want people to think that we're like kind of driving this big thing. We make a couple bucks off of each item, and that all goes to the non-friends pretty much. So if you are on the fence about ordering stuff and not lining the pockets of 2 middle-aged white guys in therapy, although therapy is not cheap, guys, it is not going to us. So that just kind of helps support Nuts and Bolts and the non-friends and things like that. So great. We added a few items in there.
And if you are a part of our Tithe.ly community or Patreon community, some of the merch, you get credits at certain tier levels. You get credits for merch.
Yeah.
So always be checking your either Tithe.ly feed or your Patreon feed for more information. So great job.
We're trying to be more active with the Patreon stuff. So
it's
I know
happening.
In the past, probably people didn't notice emails or didn't get emails because we weren't doing much. But now that we're doing book clubs and live podcast events and other shenanigans, there's more messaging happening through there. So
how great is it, Tim, that people would take time out of their Thursday night to watch the two of us? I mean, it's bad enough. It's bad enough they do it once a week, but to do it, I mean, come on now. And they'll see how very little that you normally edit, which is zero. Maybe some coughing.
Well, that's always been kind of a baseline standard, is that we wanted to let it be as raw as possible.
Yeah.
And so we've lived
Did
by
you make
that.
Gambas last episode sound like he knew what he was doing?
Take anything
Perfect.
Out.
Perfect.
So you get all the real-time long Gambas pauses, which if you don't do YouTube normally to watch, you can watch his gears turn in real time.
The gears. Yes, they do. Do we have anything or any other business?
Yeah, there's one more. We have we have a new website that's going to pop up here in the next week or two, probably.
Ooh.
And it's part of our trying to streamline and make the podcast more like just easier to share and easier to search. There'll be ways to find past episodes based on either topic or guest or even just episode number. You'll be able to type that in and kind of find the specific things you're looking for. So we're trying really hard to make this podcast easier for you to share with people and easier to find. That's why we're retitling every single episode, which is taking longer than the editing process.
Without numbers. We're not even doing numbers anymore.
We're getting rid of numbers, so it's not intimidating to jump in.
Hey, let me share. 500s. Yeah, let me share episode 472 being what did we call it? To be human, part 17.
Yeah.
We heard that wasn't exactly really easy to share or to dive in the middle of. So we are now
those notes. So the numbers
after
are going
10
away.
years. After 10 years, we are paying attention.
Well, it's funny too. Once it started to do it, when we hit episode 500, it's actually 530 or 533 or something like that. We have so many non-numbered episodes already that everything was kind of out of whack. We were way ahead of where we thought we were.
Totally, dude. I mean, 10 years of this. This is insane. And there are a few people have listened to all of it. Great business. So we are
business
because of the kind support of our Patreon and Tidely communities. We've been working with somebody who's helping us get some of this stuff cleaned up. Our friend Brenda helps us with website stuff, which is, worth tens of thousands of dollars, and she does it just because she's a fan and a friend, and so we're just completely blessed to be able to be involved in all of this stuff. So we're trying to make it easier to discover the show, share the show, and access all of the content in the back catalog. So, look at this. I really, I'm sorry, I turned the chat back on. I turned the chat back on. Serena, I really appreciate y'all's desire to make this user-friendly. Real talk, this is one of my favorite, most helpful podcasts. I'm looking forward to search the archives feature. Thank you, Serena.
We tested it the other day. We typed in Gambas on it, and it sure enough brought, and he's been on the podcast a few times, it turns out.
Yeah, as it turns out. All right, I'm turning the chat off, but that was a great comment. Okay.
Chat.
All right. Gambas gave us
Wait, I got
introduction.
questions to lead in, remember?
Oh, that's right. Well, yeah, you have topics. Oh, man. Tim.
Not topics, just some questions that we can maybe then spur into. So you and I were talking. I sent you a Instagram thing or something, a tweet. I can't remember what it was.
It was an Instagram thing.
A few days ago. I'm just going to read what it said. And then, So this said, this is your friendly reminder that biblical does not equal moral.
Ooh.
Biblical simply means it is found in the Bible. There are many immoral concepts in the Bible. Genocide is biblical. Sexual assault is biblical. Slavery is biblical. None of them are moral. So we were having a conversation about, just because we see the Bible used and now, again, with a lot of what's happening in our country and with our government, they're using the Bible to support a lot of things that don't seem super positive.
Yeah.
So we were having a conversation about what is biblical and how does that inform errancy?
Ooh.
Because of how much that also gets thrown around in these conversations. But I think it's helpful, especially with how you posture yourself as cruciform. Because, for example, too, something that popped up in the news was, and I'm sure everyone has seen this, that Greta Gerwig is casting Meryl Streep as Aslan in the new Narnia series, and so people are losing their minds that a woman will be voicing a lion who is pretending to be God, or is whatever, metaphorically God. Which kind of ties into why I was struggling with like not wanting to watch the Chosen thing. Was like,
oh, here we go. Well, here we go.
Idea of you telling me who Jesus is and how he looks and how he talks, but then this is like, it's I don't know. So it's all this stuff kind of keeps popping up in the news. So you and I were talking about prescriptive versus descriptive and how that can help.
Yes.
So what do you think? How do you approach ideas of what is biblical and how we base our morality off of that?
Oh my goodness, bro. Yeah, this is so good. And so much of our discussion these days comes back to the issue of hermeneutics, not even exegeting specific passages, but what is the Bible, how we see the Bible, how we interpret the Bible, how do we adjudicate between competing interpretations of different texts. I mean, all of this is so unbelievably important. And, the great gift and curse of some elements of postmodern sort of literary criticism. It's the idea that sitting behind competing interpretations are power plays and status seeking. And so, we're going to favor the interpretations that keep us comfortably enshrined in the status quo. I mean, all of those sorts of dynamics we just sit and recognize are also happening. However, the usage of the word biblical, it's kind of like the word Christian. It's being used in ways the Bible doesn't ever use, ever. Which is fascinating. The Bible never calls itself biblical or calls anything biblical, as it turns out, which is really interesting. Not only that, but yeah, Tim, to your point, there is a vast, vast difference between what the Bible prescribes and what the Bible describes. And so the Bible describes all the things that were in this Instagram post, right? It describes slavery. It describes polygamy. It describes violence and sexual assault, but it doesn't prescribe any of those things. And so it's another indication of how flatly we read the Bible, where it's just, if it's in there, it's biblical, and biblical means good. And that's just not at all what the Bible, how the Bible should function, or what it's intended to do kind of in the community of faith. So the first big move is to get rid of the word biblical. That's not a helpful word, because in the Bible, if all biblical means is in the Bible, well then, we're stuck in the rut of what the Instagram poster highlighted. Even when you apply biblical to words like manhood and womanhood, or biblical parenting, like those words that they get cashed out as, hey, here's the approach that aligns with the teaching of God's word. And I mean, we don't need to rehash, although we can, the damage that sort of approach, has done. So let's get rid of the word biblical. And if you hear me use it, Tim, yell at me. I can be guilty of this as well. I do want to sift and sort the texts of the scriptures well, and from them generate certain sorts of understandings or dynamics that we see reflecting the kingdom of God. So I don't know the best way to describe those, other than that this seems consistent with the practice and person of Jesus. This doesn't seem consistent with the practice and person of Jesus, and so on. But whenever we talk about interpretation, and we get this question a lot at our church, so we just even had it this past Sunday. We were talking about knowing God's will. And I was trying to make the case that God doesn't have a will in the way that we think he does. He doesn't have should I take this job, or should I drive this car, or whatever. He might, and let's be open to that. But the vast majority of human life is we're image bearers. And as people who want to be formed and shaped by the Spirit, community, and scriptures, then maybe, we're able to kind of do what we want. And there are all sorts of passages where Paul just says, yeah, I decided to do this and I decided to do that. Well, anyway, this young lady and one of the things I enjoy most about our church community, she's a young woman sitting by herself. She raises her hand and she starts by saying, "Hey, all of this sounds great in theory, but I'm not sure I trust it." And so I responded a little bit to that. And then she said, well, what if you get this wrong? I mean, don't you fear hell? And so we went off on the hell topic a little bit, because as it cashed out, what she was saying was, if you take hell away, why would you follow Jesus? She says, I can't think of a compelling reason to follow Jesus if you take hell off the table. And she's saying this courageously to a room full of religious people. And so we were off, and it was glorious. But one of her questions was, how do you arbitrate between competing interpretations of things? Because the implication that she was making is, hey, some other sweaty bald guy could be arguing the exact opposite point and claim, he's just as biblical, right? And quote Bible verses. And so how in the world do you know? So what you're raising, Tim, I mean, it may be worth to revisit kind of the approach to the Bible stuff that we did. I don't even know how many years ago that was. A while ago. It may be worth to revisit that, because that seems really at the center. Now, you apply cruciformity to that, and then if the purpose of the Bible is to generate a certain kind of community. And that's what the Bible's for, by the way. The Bible isn't to change individuals, although it does that. The Bible isn't to just save souls or give us basic instructions for life or before leaving earth or whatever it is. The Bible in its wake, shut up. The Bible in its wake gives birth to a certain kind of community. And what is that community to be like? Well, we've looked at one aspect. It's community of justice. We are looking at the second aspect. It's a cross-shaped community, and that's also a community that's giving birth to new creation in the midst of it. So when we look at competing interpretations, part of my point was, first, does it cohere to the life and teachings of Jesus? Secondly, because if it doesn't, then whatever interpretation we have is wrong. Yeah. Secondly, does it bear fruit in terms of justice seeking in the best and rightest senses of the word, cruciformity, and new creation sort of dynamics? And then does it bear fruit in the individual lives of the people? I mean, when Paul says, listen, when the Spirit is working in a community, there will be a love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control kind of fruit. Mm-hmm. As opposed to the works of the flesh, a community operating in the flesh, which is a community of dissension and division and malice and immorality. And he goes on this other list. But all of these are social behaviors, as we've been pointing out. So
it is interesting that when you think about cruciformity through this lens, because then you're like, what cross are you forming to, or what interpretation of the cross, or what belief of the cross, or however you want to frame that?
Yeah. Well, if an interpretation is cruciform, it's exalting Jesus and minimizing us. Mm-hmm. It is also leveling the playing field. It is lowering the status of high status individuals and raising the status of low status individuals, according to the world's definitions of status. Mm-hmm. That's the cruciform move. And so, man, Tim, I mean, that Instagram post and your questions generate so much conversation. So chat, if you want to talk more about this, or you're like, hey, yeah, I remember we did a Bible series, but it's time. Let's do another one. Man, all in for that. All right. Speaking of cruciformity, Tim, anything else you want to chew on there? Do you agree with that? What are your thoughts?
No, I think it's really interesting. There was something else that came through today, because somebody just mentioned the idea of biblical marriage. And there was another thing that came through today, an article or something that was talking. They was listing all of kind of like the, quote unquote heroes of the Bible, and how many different concubines, wives, everything they had, but these are the biblical heroes. So the biblical interpretation of marriage is like, well, that's wild. Like,
yeah, if biblical just means descriptive, then exactly. Look at these. Yep. Look at these. This is a clown show.
Yeah.
No
That's
doubt,
important.
bro.
That should be like, Christianity 101 is how do you approach
Yes.
the text
Yes.
before you start forming your entire opinion in life and then lording over other people. How you approach how to read this is a pretty big,
Well, and that, man, okay, so so what non-cruciformity does is it uses the text to bring death, to bring condemnation, to bring, right? So Paul will talk about the Torah of death, sin and death versus the Torah of life and spirit. And so even you can use the text in ways that aren't cruciform.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, yeah, no, totally. So this is a very juicy topic. So maybe there's more there, but let's define, because our friend Tim Gombis, he called this a narrative pattern, which I love him and he is my friend, but that is so correct theologically, but that makes zero sense. It's a narrative pattern. What does that mean? He's right. Absolutely. He's so smart. He's right. But I want to flesh that out a little bit. So the word cruciform means in the shape of the cross, right? So cruciformity is a pattern of life that coheres to the value set of the cross as Christ was on it. Now, Paul actually spells out. So we looked at a couple of episodes ago, we looked at 3 different occasions where Jesus said, take up your cross, deny yourselves, follow me. Son of Man must suffer and die. And then the disciples misunderstand. They think it's about greatness or prominence or status or whatever. And so that's all part of this discussion. But Paul sort of synthesizes this in Philippians in a very famous passage that utilizes, we think it's some sort of early creed that didn't originate with Paul, but was floating around. And so in theological terms, this creed displays something called a high Christology. It's a really high view of Jesus. You could not get a higher view of Jesus than what this hymn is. So if Paul's writing in the 50s, then this happened in the first 20 years of the church, this sort of hymn. But Paul employs it as a way to talk about how we should relate to each other. And this is when Gombis talks about a narrative pattern, this is what he's talking about. So Paul begins Philippians 2. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, and obviously you're going to have encouragement about that. If you have any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Boy, those are some juicy words. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. That's the cruciform mode right there, right? Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, which is working for my own advantage, only concerned about my own status, comfort, wealth, whatever. Do nothing from that motivation. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Now, again, all the therapeutic disclaimers, he's not meaning like codependency or, being passive and never having self-care. Those aren't the terms that Paul is operating. He's not operating in that world. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but to the interests of others. Then he says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And this is right here is the narrative pattern. Who, being in very nature God. So he had and is in his essence divine. Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. So he had all of the rights, privileges, and prerogatives of God, but he did not use those for his own advantage or his own gain, you could translate it. Rather, so he had this, but instead of using that for his own advantage, he did something else with it. He made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Now, this is one of those passages, if you've heard it a bunch, you're numb to the significance of it. So we're going to try to unnumb us a little bit. And then that mode of life, that descent from having the prerogatives of God to becoming the very form and nature of a slave, that descent Yahweh exalts Christ to the highest place and gives him the name that is above every name. Now, the thing that is absolutely insane, and then he talks about, at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. And that's language from Isaiah about Yahweh. So the mode of life that Jesus displays gets called Yahweh, Yahweh's life, Yahweh's character. This is what God is like. All right. So you could not, there's so many like theological bombs being dropped in this thing. But Michael Gorman, who Gambas referenced and who has written so many great books on this topic, one of the things he does is he translates this and he says, so here's in essence the cruciform. This is what it means to live in the shape of the cross. Jesus had all the privileges and prerogatives of God, but rather than using his privileges as God, as something to exploit for his own advantage or used for his own gain, instead, he poured himself out, made himself nothing, expended himself, humbled himself, by taking the place of lowest social honor for the sake of others. Bro. And so the progression is he goes from God to human, not just any human, a slave, not just any slave, an obedient slave, not just any kind of obedient slave, but obedient to death, and not just any kind of death, death on the cross. You could not have a greater descent from the highest possible status to the lowest possible status. And here's where we need to understand a bit about Roman society. Roman society was based on the quest for honor. Honor is social reputation. It was an honor and shame culture. If you were honored, you gained social reputation. If you were shamed, you lost social representation or reputation, excuse me. And there were, for the elite, there was something called the cursus honorum, or the course of honor, where you would enter into military service, or if you didn't need military service, you could enter into politics. And there was just these ways of accumulating social status and honor through political process and office and so on. But Rome, not surprisingly, was a very stratified society. And picture a triangle. At the very top is the emperor. At the very pinnacle is the emperor and the emperor's family. And then working our way down, and there are different estimates I've read about what percentage of the population falls, into these different categories. But, it's like, I'm guessing at this point, but it's like under 10% falls into the upper classes, and the rest are the lower classes. So the upper classes, besides the emperor, consisted of patricians, senators, and equestrians. All right, patricians. This was a political class that consisted of the families in Rome that went back for generations. If you served in political office, particularly council, at all, you were part of the senatorial class. The class was dominated by nobles, who were the inheritors of all of these traditional families. But if you were like in the equestrian class and you got elected to political office, then you could bump up to the senatorial class by virtue of your election. So this whole class was political in nature. One of the things that happens when Rome begins to tear itself apart is the conflict between the senatorial class represented by old money and the senatorial class represented by new money. And so if you could buy your way in, you could buy an election, you were considered part of the senatorial class. You needed to have property at least worth 1 million sesterces, I think is how you pronounce it, sesterces, which, back in the day was like a lot of wealth. So right below the emperor, you have the senatorial class. Below the senatorial class, or you have the patrician class. Below that, you have the senatorial class and the equestrian class. Equestrians, they were named that way because typically they were wealthy enough to own farms and horses. And so you had to have land worth at least 400,000 sesterces. And if you did, you and your family were considered a part of the equestrian class. You could run for office, although very rarely did equestrians make it up to the senatorial class. But every now and again, that would happen. Women, of course, in these classes simply shared in whatever status their husband had. So there was no independent way of operating. So you start at the top of the triangle. You've got the emperor, you've got patricians, you've got senatorial class, you've got the equestrians. Then you have the lower classes, the plebeians, the commoners. And these were freeborn Roman citizens. They had certain rights. Like if they married another freeborn Roman citizen, their children would be considered Roman citizens. There was no economic fence here. But typically these sorts of people only very, very rarely would move up into the higher classes. So this was just your ordinary lower class. The vast majority of the Roman Empire were, at least of the free people, the vast majority of the Roman Empire free people lived in this class. I'm saying this so well. Then there were people who had been freed. So you have the plebeian class that were born free, and then you have people who were set free. And the way this worked, obviously, slavery back then was just property. It wasn't racially motivated necessarily. But slaves often could have their own savings out of their pay, or sometimes very compassionate masters would release their slaves and set them free. You still had obligations to your former master. There were limits on public service. You couldn't run for public service, whatever. Okay, great. At the very bottom of that list are the slaves. And in the Roman Empire, this was the vast majority of the population, right? Because the Roman Empire expanded so broadly. One of the reasons it did is just an incessant need for more and more slaves to drive a Roman economy. So at the very top, you have the emperor, and the very bottom, you have a slave. And so when Paul is talking to a society that is that stratified, I don't know why I keep saying stratified, when he's talking to a people that is that stratified and that obsessed with honor and status. And the two examples he uses are divine honors, who being in very nature God, which is something the emperor, might claim for himself. And he became a slave like that there you could not draw a more significant picture of what cruciform life entailed. He had all the prerogatives and privileges of the emperor beyond that. And he gave them away to not just become one of the lower classes, but to be a slave, but not just any slave, a slave that's obedient. And in their obedience, they die, and then die the most shameful of all deaths. Mm-hmm. This is what Gombas calls a narrative pattern. This, Paul says, is what your relationships are to be characterized by. Oh my goodness. And so it's the following pattern. And you can apply it to money or status or privilege or whatever. Even though I have privileges and prerogatives, I don't capitalize on them for my own gain, but rather I use them in self-expenditure for the sake of others. That's the cruciform life, according to Gorman. Even though I have money, I do not use that money for my own personal gain or to get more, but rather I expend for the sake of others. I have social status, but instead of using that social status for my own advantage or to gain more social status, I now use that social status in a self-expending kind of way for the sake of others. That's cruciformity. That's the cruciform life. No matter who you are, you have certain privileges and prerogatives. that could be the privilege of time. That could be the privilege of smarts. That could be the privilege of social location. I mean, who knows? But the general orientation is, do you use what you have to enrich yourself, or do you allow yourself to be poured out? Do you self-expend for the sake of others? Does that make sense? That's the core of what Jesus means by taking up his cross. And that's the core of what the cruciform life entails. Thoughts?
It just doesn't feel very applicable to today.
I mean, it was so countercultural to the Roman way of doing things. That's why Paul is perfect. So later on in Philippians 3, you get this very famous Paul passage where Paul is like, all the things I used to be, I now consider rubbish. And he goes off on this list of all his credentials, but I consider them nothing.
Yeah.
Because, right? That's the cruciform life. Or when he will call himself a slave. Or when he'll make tents. Taking in Corinth, when they didn't value manual labor, he will become a tent maker. I mean, he will always try to occupy the lowest social location. Jesus, when you go to a banquet, take the seat of lowest honor. And when you throw a banquet, throw the banquet for the people of lowest honor. I mean, this is it. It's if you want to be first, you're going to be last. This is the entire mode of Christian life. Whew. And much, shockingly, of evangelical Christianity is designed precisely to move in the opposite direction. To gain status, to gain followers, to gain platform, to make money, to become influential. I mean, this was the track I always wanted to be on when I started pastoring. I wanted to pastor a church, not just any church. I wanted to pastor a bigger church than when I was pastoring, and one that had a great reputation. And then, you get that platform and you get a reputation, and then you get a book deal, and then you're on the conference circuit. And I mean, and again, this doesn't apply to the vast majority of our listeners who are not in vocational ministry, but you can't design church to be less cruciform than putting one person on a stage or several people on a stage for a worship and teaching event.
With a green room. Yeah, we were reading an article on, I talked to you about this earlier, but it's because all this stuff, yes, it makes sense, right? Like you break it down, you see the parallels, you see the narrative structure, however you want to frame it. And it's like, okay, I understand what he's advocating for here. Makes a lot of sense. You can see how it was happening within the time period and why.
Yes.
So then you look to now, we were reading an article on
in class,
on the environment in class, and having a conversation about that. But it's hard to get away from so many of those conversations end with how capitalism and things like that just consume and spit out. Like that's how that model works. It does it to people, but it also does it to the planet and different things like that. So you look at this conversation and then look at how, even taking it out of like, hey, when you go to a banquet, make sure you sit at the kids' table. Okay, yep, I can do that. But then when you start to see the reverberations out for what does this really mean? What do the ripple effects of this look like when you start to posture yourself in this way? They go much further out than just like the status of a dinner or whatever. Totally. You can just see the ripples go through the planet, through the environment, through nature, through all of these things. It's pretty wild.
Yes. And the question becomes, how do we then live this out today? And so I'm going to talk about 3 practices of the church that are designed to embody and inhabit cruciformity and to reshape our imaginations around it. All right. So first one, baptism, baby. Baptism. The death of the old self, symbolized by going into the water and being buried in the water. The resurrection of a new self that's defined only in terms of in Christness, right? The leveling of all my previous ways of identifying and feeling significance, status, importance, all of that dying and being risen now to brothers and sisters and siblingship in the family of God, where there's only one host and everyone else is a guest. Like baptism, we have lost. It's become this personal, like, yes, I'm being renewed. And doggone it, it is one of the most radical reshapings of identity towards cruciformity, right? Because literally, I'm considering everything else I used to be rubbish compared to now being found in Christ. That's why the early church would baptize people in white robes, because your clothing, obviously back then and even today, but your clothing showed your social location, your status, your importance. If everyone's wearing white robes, then all you're seeing are people in white robes. You're not seeing status, you're not seeing location, you're not seeing anything like that. I mean, what an incredible picture. And so, one of the things the early church, Luke, records for us in Acts is that you've got Samaritans getting baptized, eunuchs getting baptized, a centurion getting baptized, two households in Philippi, a rich woman who owned a house, and the jailer that held them in prison. They're both baptized. The leader of a synagogue in Corinth was baptized. I mean, like literally, it levels and flattens everybody out. And so one of the things that's been, tragically lost in baptism is that sense of I'm abandoning all previous forms of identity. Because what happens now to us as evangelicals, I've put on a new identity as an evangelical. And that evangelical identity, not always, but sometimes, is full of status keeping and hierarchy and clout chasing, right? And it's just the same course of honor that was encouraged in Rome. Now that's just baptized into Christ, couldn't be less cruciform. Make sense?
I wonder if that, I feel like you could do a whole episode on that. We talked about a while ago about doing a short series on spiritual disciplines and kind of engaging and relearning what those mean and how to approach them and how to do them. But maybe we should do a whole series, and maybe you guys can pipe in the chat, like almost like a Christianity 101 series or something like that. Because baptism has become this kind of like interesting spectacle thing that we'll do on a Sunday morning where they'll have the music playing and people just kind of rotate through really quickly, and you'll say the little, do you accept this, blah, blah, blah. You'll go down, come out. You'll maybe get a t-shirt depending on how much money the church has. But nothing like what you're talking about, right? Like,
no, I've never done it that way.
No, and I would love to. That sounds amazing. Like this really actual communal leveling event to celebrate renewal and rebirth and all that. Like, it sounds amazing, but instead it's this kind of awkward thing that we do on a Sunday. I don't know, but it would be interesting to do like a Christianity 101 thing. That's like, this is how you approach just the biblical, unbiblical, and then baptism, whatever else comes out of it.
Oh, bro. I used to wonder how we would ever fill 10 years of episodes. I didn't even
more
think
ideas
we'd be around.
Time.
I know, seriously. All right. Practice number 2, not shocking, communion. Now, again, meals back then, we've talked ad nauseum about this. Meals back then were a performance of your social standing. Mm-hmm. Meals would reinforce social barriers. So elites would invite and dine with elites. The poor would invite and dine with the poor. The sinners would invite and dine with the sinners. So, and then within those tables, there were status distinctions in terms of where you sat relative to the host, and so on, so on, so on. So we've talked about this before. I won't spend too much time on it, but the idea that Jews who were taught to never eat with Gentiles, and in a sense were superior and closer to God, eating with Gentiles who were taught that Jews were this anomaly. That, there were rumors, there were people that were considered atheists, and the animosity between Jew and Gentile. So when you have a meal with Jew, Gentile, slave free, Greek, Hebrew, barbarian,
Democrat,
Scythian. Yes, exactly. When you have, like, you're literally performing cruciformity there because you're setting aside all the privileges and prerogatives to be identified with people who don't share the same privileges and prerogatives.
Yeah.
That's why James goes after favoritism so hard. He's like, guys, like, you are robbing, he doesn't say this, but you're robbing the cross of its power. I think that's a phrase from Hebrews. But that's in essence kind of why, like, Paul will even look at the Corinthians and say, guys, some of you are falling asleep right now because you were performing the Lord's Supper so poorly. And then lastly, when we have solidarity with the poor and marginalized, I'm having trouble speaking English. Anomaly, stratified,
Stratify.
solidarity. See?
Firmament.
Yeah, firmament. That's funny. Solidarity with the poor and the marginalized. And solidarity here is a really important word, like we began to talk about with Malcolm Foley. It's not charity, it's not philanthropy, it's solidarity. So it's relationships of mutual reciprocity, mutual gift giving. There's no sense of superiority. And again, all of these, baptism, solidarity with the poor, and communion, are all leveling. They're all leveling. So part of the cruciform imagination is when we're engaging in these kind of formative disciplines. Now, let's think about those pictures for a second. And so you have a picture of a high status individual sharing a meal with low status individuals and not caring about their status. You have a picture of low status and high status individuals forsaking all of those differences in social standing for the sake of putting on a white robe to stand as brothers and sisters. And then you have people who have much sharing with people that don't have the same amount so that everyone has enough. I mean, that's kind of revolution. That's a recipe for revolution right there. So cruciformity, I mean, it's going to play out in leadership. It's going to play out in churches. It's going to play out in how you drive and how you use the Bible. And you know what I mean? I mean, you can tell there are people that use the Bible in ways that try to just enrich their own status and make themselves look good. And then there are people that use the Bible to try to help. And it's like my therapist. We have this pastoral cohort that's meeting next Monday. And we're going to discuss the question my therapist asked me, which is, whose wounds are you trying to heal when you stand up there and teach?
Yeah.
You know, and the non-cruciform posture is, well, yeah, I'm trying to heal my own. So thoughts, Timothy. That's the presentation. Or maybe we should just unleash the chat.
Yeah, we should probably unleash the chat. It's a lot to chew on in there. I think at the First Church of Golgotha, we'll hike down to the river to pray.
Yes.
About that good old way. Yes, there's some questions in here.
All right, buddy. Pick them out. Chat, thank you.
If Jesus declared the kingdom of heaven opened and now here on earth, now and not yet, then living outside of that is living in the kingdom of hell. You don't need to die to experience reality either. You just watch the news. You can see hell played out in real time.
It's true. It's interesting. James speaks of the tongue, the power of the tongue, as being empowered by hell. So in a sense, like, there is a part that hell is a current reality. It's now and kind of not yet. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's good.
What if part of cruciformity is exemplified in the extravagant, scandalous love demonstrated by Mary in John 12, who anoints Jesus' feet? Is the call to cruciformity a scandalous love?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so let's assume that jar. Now, I don't know this for certain, and there are loads of debates about this, but let's assume that jar was a tool of her trade. And that would be worth so much money. Mm-hmm. That would be worth, and remember that if it's the story I'm thinking of, the other disciples go, why this waste? Right? So here she is. She She has privileges and prerogatives that at least include this jar of perfume, but instead of using that for her own advantage and gain, she literally pours it out. And as a result, Jesus says her story will still be told, as we're doing right now. Yes, an extravagant love. Absolutely. The problem is that love is such a slippery word, as we've talked about a bunch, that extravagant love doesn't just mean feelings of extravagance. It means acts, even if they're not accompanied with devotion, but they're acts that are for the blessing and flourishing of others. So in a sense, absolutely, that's right.
Yeah. All right, here's another one. I wonder, this actually kind of recalls some of Sky's questions. I wonder, is there any value in gaining status or following in order to help more people? If there is a pure heart present, man, we talked about this in class yesterday too. A student was pushing back on me about heart postures. Okay. If there is a pure heart present, could good be done that is honoring to Jesus, or is corruption creeping at the door in those scenarios more?
Ooh. What was your conversation like?
Well, in my thing, we were talking about how climate change, because that's what the article was on, climate change, how it is disproportionately affects lower socioeconomic people. So in the article itself, it was talking about some major storms that had happened in Mozambique. And I brought up like Hurricane Katrina, because, that whole area is like below sea level. So it literally turns into a bowl if a levee breaks and fills with water. And so students are always like, well, then why don't people just move? And it's like, well, they can't.
Right.
So so we're talking about how if being a steward of the earth was one of our initial calls, why the church doesn't lead on that conversation, but also, if you don't want to answer that call, just the call of caring for the marginalized or caring for the people who are have less, well, this affects them the most. So there's a way to be partners in trying to alleviate some of that burden. So the kid was like, well, what if your heart's not in the right spot for to do that? And I was like, that you're bringing up a different conversation entirely. And I was like, but if you're gonna sin, if that's what you're asking, then go ahead and sin in a way that at least helps your neighbor out instead of yourself. And they all looked at me like,
Beautiful, man. I love it.
But it is a question, right? So Sky has kind of posed the same thing about influence.
Yeah.
I think was more his
look, if God gives it, use it. If you chase it, stop chasing it. End of story for me. I mean, if God opens doors, and I don't mean like in some mystical weird way, but like people too. Sometimes God will use somebody, and if influence comes, then yes, let's steward that well. But to go chase it for the sake of others, I don't know, man. I'm way too cynical to think that's a legit possibility.
I think it was Pastor Mike Erre many years ago.
Oh boy.
That I think you're the first person I heard talk about like going through the eye of the needle. That it wasn't wrong to be wealthy. It was harder because of all of the stuff that comes with it, the distracting nature of trying to self-preserve and to hold on to things. And so I think power's probably a lot in the same way. Like,
bro, I didn't want to go to power because this is the power under, power over convo that we spent a lot of time on. But yeah, dude, of course, this is
well, as you were talking about Jesus' delineation down, it's like, it's literally the most clear case of power under.
Yes.
Like to go from the very top and then continue to descend to the lowest posture.
Yes. And to do so non-violently and allow violence to be done to you. I mean, wow. That's insane.
Some folks are interested on spiritual disciplines. Let's see. Question. How does this posture of cruciformity relate to how we should engage with warfare or violence? Also, as a tangent, I have heard Mike mention his Anabaptist influences in this area of nonviolence. Are there any old episodes or books he could recommend that have shaped him in that area?
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. I'm looking over at my bookshelf. There is a book. Everyone needs to read it, and maybe that's our next book club. I just found our next book club. It's called The Upside Down Kingdom. Donald Craybell.
There we go.
All right. So if you're on Patreon, we'll put a date for the next book club. That's the book we're going to use. Upside Down Kingdom, Donald Craybell. Stanley Hauerwas, Will Williman also. Man, phenomenal stuff. So does this relate to violence? Oh, yes, it does. Absolutely. And all the disclaimers we've had. I don't remember how many conversations we've had about violence. We distinguish between force and violence. So there are times when restraint is necessary to thwart greater evil. But I don't know that you could ever say violence is justified. The best thing I think you could say is that sometimes restraint is necessary. So if somebody barges into my house and is threatening my wife and children, I will use force to try to restrain them. Absolutely. Anyway, I mean, but Preston Sprinkle wrote a book on this, on nonviolence. I don't remember the name of it, but I remember it was called Fight, I think it was. And it was pretty good too. But the violent question, I think Jesus really settles for us in the idea of don't return evil for evil. So creative goodness is the way that we're supposed to do that. But I can also, I've been in situations where, for the sake of protecting others, force was needed, but I was hopefully not engaging in violence. So,
yeah.
Anywho, that's a great question. Man, our chat, dude.
Yeah.
Look at our little chat.
Let's see. One from Serena. I have a question about that verse in 1 Corinthians, I think, where Paul is telling the Corinthian church that people are dying because of their communion meal practices. I've always been taught that this verse meant that if you took communion in the wrong way, God might choose to strike you down. But what if people were dying in the community because they were literally starving, because the meal wasn't being practiced correctly? The rich were eating without the poor and leaving them with nothing. So it's not God striking people down, but rather the community is experiencing the natural consequences of the sin of some of its members.
Ooh, that's a great question. And certainly, is that Serena asking that?
Mm-hmm.
Man, Serena's got a great brain. She asks great questions. I mean, our whole crew does. But the 1 Corinthians passage, as you mentioned, is totally misunderstood. If you eat communion inappropriately, you're toast. And in a sense, that's right. We just sort of misidentify what the inappropriately is, because the context is the rich are eating separately from the poor and reinforcing the social boundaries along the lines of the Roman banquets that were very common at that time, where the rich would eat with the rich, the poor would eat with the poor. And so it's not the poor that are dying, though. I think the warning is to the rich there. So I don't know if it's the natural consequences of the poor starving, although that could be in view. The warning feels like it's to the rich, and that some of them are in jeopardy if they don't readjust the Lord's Supper. And I don't know if that's right or not. That's just my read of the text. But I do think it interesting that when Paul talks about like eating the body or blood, or he says recognizing or eating the body or blood in a worthy manner, you should eat recognizing the body of Christ. That is all communal. That is not me doing a ruthless moral inventory before my life, before I take communion or something. Okay, let's do a couple more. We're an hour in.
Steve says, but cruciform preaching starts with applying the cross to oneself. That isn't all bad, is it? Well, there was another one about woundedness too. I can see someone preaching from woundedness, but isn't it another matter to experience healing from the cross?
Sure. And God, is so marvelous that think of all the jackhammers and jackrabbits that God uses in the text. Paul, what a great example. You know what I mean? Peter. So
Peter's
yes,
a great example, yeah.
It's the issue isn't I'm wounded, so God can't use me or can use me, or that God only uses those who are preaching to heal other people. No. I'm one of those that God has used who just like only in the last few years have woken up to, my motives towards this. So for me, the issue isn't can God use you or not. Of course, he can, man. I mean, the testimony of the Bible is he can use anything. It's rather, how do I become the kind of person trustworthy with that kind of platform in ways that guard my own heart, my family, and the lives of and hearts of the listeners? What are the ways in which I can actively resist the dynamics that are not cruciform at all, that are at work in American evangelicalism?
Do you think part of that woundedness is like the thorn in my flesh kind of thing, like a humility to be able to posture from?
Well, I had two kinds of weakness going on in my life. One came from being depressed and anxious, being on medication, being in therapy, being terrified of standing up in front of people. There were times I would be backstage. Our church was booming, and I'd just be weeping because the last thing I wanted to do was go out and do anything. And then we had our first child had an autism diagnosis that we weren't ready for, and then obviously Seth, who is the delight of our lives, showed up. But that was a hard process for a while. I mean, there were just so there was a natural weakness of life that kept me dependent the whole way through, and that feels thorn in the fleshy. But there was another form of weakness that were the habits and patterns that had been ingrained in my psyche, even if I hadn't chosen them, because of poor attachment or whatever. But I had found competence and approval as a teacher, and the danger is, and this was me. I was unaware of how deep that went. I would have told you 20 years ago when we were together in that church. I've got all this junk and I've got all this stuff, but like to look back at it and see that the concern wasn't as much who's being healed. That was a great byproduct, but the concern was, did I do a good job? Could I go to the debrief after the service and feel good about what I did? Yeah. Was I going to get good emails this week, or were they going to be critical? And so I was trying to generate life from how well I did to hide shame. Yeah. And I mean, man, that is death. That makes you over the long run, those sorts of fractures make you untrustworthy with that kind of platform.
Yeah. And somewhere back hundreds of episodes, there's a good long deeper dive into that where you did a whole long thing on the difference between the public and private self, and that division that has to happen for pastors, or doesn't have to, but it has become the model, so that people have to present this perfect public persona, which means they have to hide much of their private persona. And you even broke that down to like, how did you word it? Like, part of the private stuff isn't that, they're not secrets, but how did you word it? There's two different versions of
there's privacy versus secrecy. Privacy means the right people know. Secrecy means nobody knows.
Right.
Totally, dude.
Well, there's one more question on
all right. Chat, you guys are amazing. Thank you for this. I hope those of you who are listening appreciate the questions. Oh, Seth Erre's preparing himself for the big finale. He's walking behind me, looking.
There was a question about Presbyterian. I think it's Presbyterian where I lost it, but about like not being able to take communion if you don't have a pastor or a person who's I can't remember. I went to
an elder
church
or pastor.
For the first time, and I was like, wait, what? We're not doing communion today because somebody who doesn't have the certificate's not there. So I struggled with that.
Yeah, I can see that too. I really go back and forth with, I think, both the non-denominational practices of my own church and the kind of high church sacramental practices of like the Catholic Church or Lutheran Church or Presbyterian Church. They both miss it in different ways.
Yeah.
I love the sacramentalists that take this far more seriously than I do. It's not just like grab a Dorito and diet Mountain Dew. You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Which church is that?
I don't know. Church of Golgotha, maybe? I don't know.
No. I haven't had a Mountain Dew in 25 years, probably.
Yeah. I'd like to see you on a Mountain Dew, by the way. So on the one hand, I'm sympathetic I have sympathetic leanings to the people that want to take this like more seriously. But yeah, it's hard to generate from the New Testament any sense that there has to be an authorized representative present, because this is just what they did. They just shared love feasts. So
That's
even
why
that
seems like they're putting the importance in the wrong. Like they're making it
Correct.
important, but they're making it important in the
correct.
wrong. Yeah.
Exactly. That's why I think it's malformed in that direction.
Yeah.
I think my tradition and our practice is malformed when we take a tiny bit of bread and dip it in a cup of juice in a very individualistic, private, non-communal way.
Prepackaged.
Yes, man, it's just awful. It feels consumeristic. It's efficient. That's why we do it that way. It just represents none of the values of the table and the significance and like political power of what that would have represented in the ancient world.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. This is so great though. I will say this. It is, it's an hour, 7 minutes, crushed it. Our chat is amazing. There's so much we didn't get to and so many great comments. This is so good. So Davey said, this is the communion of a bedside Baptist. The bedside Baptist, they don't get up. Evidently it's, so if I got some Coors Light and a pretzel, maybe I could do communion too. I don't know. Okay. All right. Seth Erre is standing very close to me with a guitar and, grabbing a headphone or AirPod. There he is. All right. What are we doing, Sethy? I never know. I never know what's going to happen. What are we doing, buddy?
Let's do a song. Tim Stafford is the boring yellow hair.
Tim Stafford, boring yellow hair. Okay.
It's a greatest hit.
Okay, no, I'm not going to touch the microphone because we
don't pull the microphone away.
Just come here.
Hey, all
right, ready?
Yes.
This is the Tim Stafford boring yellow hair song.
Yes, yeah.
All right, here we go.
It was just my two.
Analogy.
Yeah.
Hierarchy. Stratification.
Here you go.
Analogy.
Analogy.
I know, I was trying to get all the words right that I mispronounced.
Tim Stafford.
Tim Stafford.
His yellow hair.
Yellow hair. I mean, you're welcome. What can I say except you're welcome? All right, buddy, you want to do Shema?
Oh yeah.
Okay, man, we got. Yeah, it's a greater and greater.
What's your favorite Disney movie? Raise your hand.
Raise your hand for what's your favorite Disney movie?
Yes.
How does this relate to the Shema?
Raise your hand.
Okay.
What's your favorite Disney movie? Moana.
Yours is Moana. I like Moana.
I like Moana.
Maui.
Just watch the second one.
Yeah, we like Maui, huh?
What's this? The beach blonde hair.
Beach blonde hair. What's that have to do with Maui?
Just for
he's saying I have the physique of the
postcard
Rock.
propaganda. No. There's a strand of thought here that you have to sort of. Chuck raised his hand. Look at, you're getting Giuseppe to manager, bro. All right,
there you go.
Ready?
Yes, Shema Israel.
Adonai Elenehu, Adonai Echad, Hero Israel, the Lord alone.
God, and we will do it.
Love the Lord your God by your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Amen.
Amen.
Hit the song.
Hit the song. All right, friends, Romans, countrymen and women, thank you for lending us your ears. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. The Voxology podcast is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is made possible by listeners just like you. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology podcast or on Tithely, tithe.ly, and just search Voxology podcast. Links for both are in the show notes and on our website. You can interact with the hosts on Facebook /Voxology podcast or on Instagram at Voxology Podcast, and on Twitter or X, whatever it is, at Mike Erre. Thank you for walking this long road with us.